It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to another Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure that you can catch every Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Now, we've come to the end of our Godzilla Millennium Era month and the final Japanese Godzilla film for 12 years, Godzilla Final Wars. If this was the one Toho wanted to go out on, well, they did a damn good job of giving fans everything they could possibly want. Final Wars marks the 50th anniversary of the first Godzilla film, and it just feels like a big old celebration. Director Ryuhei Kitamura likened the film to like a rock band's greatest hits album, and that is a fantastic comparison. Of course, there is no connection to the previous two films about Mechagodzilla, nor does Mechagodzilla appear in this movie, but it doesn't really matter. In some ways, it feels more connected to the Showa era than anything else. And that's probably a pretty fair assessment that I just made. Kitamura was critical of the Godzilla films made since the 80s. He grew up on the 70s films, just like I did, and stated he always felt those movies had some sort of a message that they were trying to convey. They were definitely of their time, sure, but they were more than just monster flicks. He felt the movies in the 80s and 90s had really kind of lost that touch. While I don't know if I entirely agree with this take, I cannot deny that the films of the Showa era is where my love of Godzilla really came from. Kitamura also wanted to stick to as much practical effects as possible. He looked at it like this. For 50 years, they did it the same way. Yes, some of the Millennium Era did use CGI to show Godzilla swimming underwater, running away from the camera, or running towards the camera, or whatever the case may be, but really for the most part, the monsters were always guys in suits. He was going to stick to that no matter what, but there was one exception. He stated that the American Godzilla film used CGI specifically because Americans, unlike the Japanese, do not use those guys in suits. He told his team that they were sticking to special effects, and when the American character that is named Zilla shows up, then that will be CGI and that's it. It was really meant to show the difference between the two styles. And yes, let's talk about Zilla. Godzilla 1998, which is the Roland Emmerich film, is one of only two movies I will never cover. And the reason for that is that it's just really bad. It's very bad. And the main disappointment of the American Godzilla film made by Roland Emmerich was the creature himself. Generally, the movie is kind of what you'd expect from a 90s Hollywood summer popcorn movie. However, this supposed Godzilla looks more like an iguana that walks on its hind legs, more than what you'd think Godzilla would look like. He seems small, he doesn't have his atomic breath, he seems just off. In fact, I can tell you it's obvious that this American monster was an iguana because in the opening credits, you see an iguana looking at the French nuclear bomb test, and yeah, that's another thing. The monster is blamed on the French instead of the Americans, which is a cop-out. But there's a clear look at an iguana, or something that's very similar to an iguana, looking at the mushroom cloud that's formed by the nuclear test. So it's obviously meant to seem as though it's a mutated iguana and not really something more like a Tyrannosaurus Rex type of look that the original Godzilla films always went with. So yeah, Toho renamed that character Zilla. And there's even a moment in one of the movies that a guy asked if Godzilla attacked New York City, and another guy says, basically, nah, they think it was Godzilla, but it was a different creature. So take that, shitty Godzilla movie. Anyway, back to Final Wars. The movie actually made its world premiere in Hollywood a week before being released in Japan. And this was a pretty expensive entry, coming in at nearly 2 billion Japanese yen. And despite the reviews being fairly positive, the movie ended up not making a profit. And in the years since, the film does appear on several top 10 lists from Godzilla fans, because while it does tend to go light on story, it gives Godzilla fans everything they could possibly want, with tons of action and an awful lot of monster action. So there is a lot that happens in this movie, so let's go ahead and dig into this feast for all kaiju fans' eyes. The movie opens with that classic Godzilla theme and the old school Toho scope logo before giving us a much more rockin' soundtrack and showing us Godzilla at the South Pole. And he's up against the Earth Protection Force group that has these new machines that they use to fight against monsters, and basically they have like drills on them. They can go underwater, they can go above land, they can fly, and they're really, really effective against the various monsters. Now this attack is led by Akira Nakao's character, and he's commanding this team that puts Godzilla on ice, and he's down in he's basically buried into Antarctica. Now, Nakao should be pretty darn recognizable to people who have watched these movies, because not only did he appear in a few of the Heisei era films, he also appeared as the Prime Minister of Japan in the last two entries. So from there, we're kind of given these newsreel style history of how a century of wars had awoken several monsters, and the Earth Defense Force was formed to battle these creatures to keep the world safe. There were also some humans with special mutant abilities found to be able to help in this battle against the giant monsters, and it's important that we talk about those mutants here shortly, because they will play a little bit of a major part in once the real bad guys come into play here. But then Godzilla highlights played during the credits, and we do get to see some special appearances from various monsters. We see Gazora in there. I believe Baragon shows up in one of the newsreel footages. Megaguirus shows up. So it really does feel like this movie is meant to kind of exist in every timeline and show as many of these monsters as possible. Now, as the movie begins, we see the actor Don Frye leading this another crew on this kind of drilling amphibious tank submarine jet plane vehicle thing, and they're battling the underwater serpent like kaiju called Manda. Now, if you were to see this Don Frye guy and you see his mustache and you see generally his kind of blockheadish kind of visage, you'd probably think that he sure looks like someone who was a pro wrestler, and boy howdy, you'd be correct. He actually was. He was also an MMA fighter. But he's one of the most awesome human characters to ever exist in a Godzilla movie. But they are able to destroy Manda after freezing the creature and then essentially using the drill at the front of the ship to drill into it and smash it to bits. We then switch to showing some training that involve the mutants, and they go through this really intense training that involves a lot of kicking each other very hard and running on walls and flying at each other. This is obviously influenced by both kung fu movies of the East and international hits like The Matrix, and I would even argue the X-Men as well. But this is with, giant monsters though, so it's awesomely silly. Now, our main hero is one of the mutant foot soldiers of the EDF, and his name is Shinichi Ozaki. Now, since his craft, the Gatango, which was the ship that we saw at the beginning, battled both Godzilla and then a few years later battling Manda, it's in for repairs, and the captain, who's played by Don Frye, seriously, I don't remember his character's name, I don't really care to learn it, because Don Frye is literally the only name this guy should go by in any movie or any situation in life. But Don Frye is in the brig for punching a superior officer. So Ozaki's being sent on bodyguard duty to watch after a UN biologist named Dr. Otonashi, and he expects this to be boring and a pain in the ass because UN people are cranky old farts. Those are his words, not mine. But Mayuki Otonashi happens to be a hot babe. He has a slightly different opinion of his mission now, even though he still continuously makes an ass of himself in the early moments of trying to get to know Dr. Otonashi. But they go to check out this 12,000-year-old fossil that appears to be part animal, part machine. This cyborg probably is from another planet. Now, the creature, which is totally Gigan, which we haven't talked about Gigan yet, but he also shares a genetic genome with the human mutants. This means that the mutants are not an evolved human being native to Earth. They're likely part alien. And they learn from Mothra's twin fairies that kind of starts to communicate with them psychically that this creature is Gigan, and Mothra fought against him 12,000 years ago and stopped him from causing great destruction. They say Gigan is evil, and the mutants share that evil blood. Each individual mutant, though, has the will to decide how to use their powers, either for good or for evil. After the psychic conversation is concluded and they kind of see themselves back in the lab again where they were studying Gigan, they were given a talisman from the fairies. They said that they'll know when to use it. Now, on the way to New York, the new UN head honcho from Japan is killed, or seemingly killed, when Rodan zips by and destroys the plane. After a particularly hilarious scene in New York City with a pimp and a cop, where the pimp just casually pulls a gun on the cop and the cop does nothing about it except for just tell him to put away the weapon, stop this, stop all this nonsense, so on and so forth. It's truly a hilarious scene. It's probably out there on YouTube, very easy to find. But anyway, after that scene happens, Rodan shows up and starts laying waste to the city. Anguirus begins to attack Shanghai. Sydney is attacked by Zilla. Okinawa is attacked by King Caesar, who we have not seen since the very first Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. Paris is attacked by by this praying mantis type creature called Kamacuras, and Arizona is attacked by Kamonga, who's a giant spider. It's monsters all over the world, and it's stretching the EDF pretty thin. Now, in the woods around Mount Fuji, the baby Godzilla, who is commonly referred to as either Minya or Manila, but I think in this one he's actually, I think he's actually referred to as Mina or something like that. Anyway, he's often referred to as several different characters, but the baby Godzilla has shown up. Now, also in Japan, at the Tokai power plant, Ebra the giant lobster, I don't think we've talked about his movie yet either, is making a mess of the place. And we get to actually see what the mutants can do from the EDF against these monsters. Their powers and strength basically make it so that they are able to bring down Ebra without much more than their own talents and bazookas and lasers. It's actually cool to see people dealing with one of these giant monsters. However, the mystery of all these monsters deepens when, as soon as they appear, they are more or less beamed away by a UFO. And one of these UFOs appears in the skies over the EDF headquarters. And the Secretary General of the UN beams down, saying that he was in danger, but these aliens rescued him. He says that this will be a historic moment because the aliens are friendly and they offer peace. And to show their benevolence, they said that they eliminated the attacking monsters. Now, these aliens call themselves the Exilians, and they say that a rogue planet is traveling quickly towards Earth and will collide with us in about 15 months or so. The Secretary General convinces the UN and the rest of the world to work with the Exilians. As time passes, the world seems to have fallen in love with the Exilians, almost like they're rock star celebrities. Dr. Adanashi's sister Anna is a news reporter, but she has found something interesting about the Secretary General of the UN. He doesn't blink anymore. The Adanashi sisters and Ozaki decide to maybe try to go and talk to them. Now, Anna has met the Secretary General. He's been on her program, but he doesn't seem to recognize her. And after an attempt is made on his life by somebody who's kind of an overzealous anti-alien kind of guy, Anna tries to care for a cut on his hand, and he pushes her away and flees. Dr. Adanashi then studies the blood and discovers that he is indeed one of the aliens. So Ozaki decides to report to his superior at the EDF, but realizes that she has also been replaced, as she doesn't seem to blink anymore either. So he changes what he was reporting to try to maybe not give up the goose that may be there onto the alien plot. And he just says, maybe we should get some extra security for the Secretary General. Now, the Otonashi sisters also discover that the pictures taken from various observatories and satellites for this rogue planet all seem to be the exact same picture and angle of the rogue planet. Not knowing who to trust, Ozaki decides to go free Don Fry out of the brig and have him work with them to renew, to basically reveal that the Exilians are not who they say they are. And Don Fry's character immediately takes a shine to Anna Otonashi, and she does him too, which is kind of funny because there are some really, really obvious like sexual innuendo between the two, and it's kind of goofy because Don Fry seems so out of place for this, but whatever. They use Dr. Otonashi, Mayuki, as bait to lure out the ranking members of the EDF into a trap where Don Fry, Ozaki, and the other mutants kill the duplicates and watch them transform into their natural forms. Meanwhile, Anna has set up a trap for the Secretary General on live TV. You see, he talked about having a dog in his first scene with Anna, and but she decides, well, let's reintroduce the dog to the Secretary General, and she not only changes the dog and uses her own, but she also changes the name. And when she tricks the Secretary General and reveals that he doesn't even recognize what his own dog's name or his actual dog is, the most popular and leader of the Exilian force, X, begins to laugh maniacally. This is the perfect time for the good guys to come in, and Don Fry tosses the dead Exilian corpse, one of the dead Exilian corpse that he shot, onto the stage, and then shoots the Secretary General, revealing that he too is an alien. Seeing his moment to take control, X kills the Exilian High Commander and takes over the alien forces. He reveals that the humans are to be Exilian food supply. He explains that the monsters are actually under their control, but there's more to it than that. When the backup comes in the form of the EDF mutants, X shows that he can actually take control of their minds and turn them against the humans. Somehow this does not turn Ozaki against the humans, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the next thing on X's list of things to do is to command Gigan to rise, and he then tells the Exilians to release all the monsters and all their fighters to destroy human civilization. And it really doesn't take too long for the Exilians and the monsters to really mess things up. Meanwhile, the baby Godzilla and the old man and the kid who found him decide, maybe we should find a place to camp out away from all this action. So the rest of the heroes all get together and get into the Gatango ship, and Don Fry says that the only hope for them is to release Godzilla. They know the Exilians can't control Godzilla because he does not have the same shared DNA genetics like the other mutants and the other monsters do. So the mission to awaken Godzilla is being dubbed Final War, as this is the last hope for the human race. So the Gatango gets down to the South Pole, but is intercepted by Gigan, who attacks. And Gigan messes up the Gatango pretty good, but not bad enough to stop them from firing missiles into the ice and freeing Godzilla, who instantly comes out and decides that he needs to have a word with Gigan. Gigan tries to bring Godzilla into his chest saw thing. Yeah, let's talk about this here real quick. Gigan has this thing in his chest that is a rotary saw, basically. Now, we've not yet talked about him in his movie. You just have to accept this. He's a cyborg creature. So, but even though he's trying to basically cut Godzilla in two with his saw chest thing, Godzilla just unleashes his atomic breath and blows Gigan's head up. So Godzilla then follows the Gotengo away from the South Pole. Next stop, Sydney. And who's in Sydney? Why, it's Zilla, our American version of Godzilla. I'm sure this will be a heck of a fight. Oh, wait, nope, he just kills him instantaneously. Godzilla continues on, and his next foe is Kamonga, the giant spider. This is yet another battle that doesn't last too long, as Godzilla grabs him by the webbing and basically yeets the freaky spider all the way to the moon, for all I know. Next up is the giant praying mantis Kamacuras, who gets impaled almost instantaneously on a power line structure. So the Exilians are not really bringing out the big guns here. Gigan's tough, but that was quick. After that, it was Zilla, Kamonga, and Kamacuras. I mean, come on. The aliens need to call up some of the major leaguers, or this won't last very long. So they bring in Rodan, which is good. They're learning. Rodan's a pretty tough guy. They also bring in Godzilla's old buddy Anguirus and King Caesar. So all three charge, and Godzilla is able to basically fight them off by using some acrobatics, like launching himself off of Anguirus' head and flips over Rodan, who then runs into King Caesar. King Caesar tries some parkour business, only for Godzilla to body slam him on top of Anguirus. Anguirus and Rodan start to get a couple of decent licks in, and even King Caesar uses the rolled up version of Anguirus as like a spiky soccer ball. That's pretty fun. But after Godzilla piles the trio of bad guys into a stack, basically, he seems pretty satisfied with this victory. Meanwhile, this whole 3 against 1 battle was watched by the baby Godzilla, and he starts to grow a little bit bigger after he blows out a smoke ring instead of his atomic breath. Now back to the Gotengo. Now they decide to attack the Exilians pretty much head on. They are not able to blast through the force field on the Exilian mothership. One of the controlled mutants that Ozaki fought earlier in the movie and kind of broke free from the Exilian control decides to fly a jet into the power source for the force field, which allows the Gotengo to drill right into the mothership. Before they can blow the place up with the maser cannon, the Gotengo is boarded, the rest of the crew is killed, and Ozaki, Don Fry, and Dr. Adanashi are taken captive. Elsewhere, the Twin Fairies decide to send Mothra into battle to help out Godzilla while he's still laying the smackdown on some of his former foes. Godzilla messes up Hedorah, the smog monster, by using Ebra as a spear to stab the goopy dude with his claws against the building, and then he finished them both off by using his atomic breath. Now, Godzilla sees a big ball of something coming from the sky toward the Earth, so he decides to blast it with his atomic breath, and it lands with a big boom. This is a new creature named Monster X. He looks pretty awesome. It's kind of curious to give Godzilla a brand new foe in this final film of an era, but I don't know, whatever. We'll check back in on him. But Godzilla finds out that this guy is pretty tough. But wait a minute. This monster shoots 3 beams of yellow electrical energy? What's this? Oh, anyway, it doesn't matter. Mothra comes in and joins the fray and takes on the newly rebuilt Gigan. Mothra starts with some wind from her wings. Gigan counters with some grab and toss action. He then cuts off part of her wing, forcing her to crash and not be able to fly as well as she normally can. Meanwhile, X explains why he can't control Ozaki. You see, he's something that's called a Kaiser. Ozaki has the possibility to become an all-powerful being, and that is the mutation within the mutation. But by triggering that mutation a little bit further, X is finally able to seemingly take control of Ozaki to fight against his friends until Dr. Adanashi stabs him or hits him with the talisman that the Twin Fairies gave them earlier to kind of clear his mind and free him. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield of the monsters, Godzilla is taking on both this Monster X and Gigan, and he holds his own for a bit until Mothra has to come in to help him out. And Mothra and Gigan eventually take each other out by Gigan first launching a couple of these kind of saw blades at her, but she avoids them. But she gets set on fire by Gigan's laser beam eyes. However, the returning blades that kind of boomerang back ends up cutting off Gigan's own head, which she then Mothra uses her own flaming body to fly into him and blow him up. That leaves only Monster X and Godzilla, while our heroes on board the mothership take on the Exilians. And the humans are pretty overpowered at first on that mothership until the leaders of the world, the EDF, the UN, and so forth, who were earlier duplicated by the Exilians, come to help out. Before getting them off of the ship, Don Frye decides that he wants to stay behind to beat up some of the Exilians, because of course he does. But eventually Ozaki realizes that his power is his own free will to use his powers as he sees fit. So he suddenly becomes as powerful, or at least on the same power level as X, and starts to defeat him by more or less punching him to death. This, though, is all while the mothership begins self-destructing. The humans escape as it begins blowing up, and Ozaki gets on board the Gotengo just in the nick of time. So now, with the Exilians defeated, that only leaves Godzilla and Monster X. But man, something does seem pretty dang familiar about him. Oh, but what's this? He begins transforming. Oh, hot damn. It is Ghidorah. It's not just King Ghidorah. No, this is actually dubbed Kaiser Ghidorah. He's bigger and badder than ever before, and this is perfect that the classic era of Godzilla concludes with him taking on his number one enemy. So he messes up Godzilla something awful too. He begins blasting Big G with his laser beams. He uses those beams as a way to pick up Godzilla, throw him around into buildings, slam him into the ground, and then he starts jumping on him and kicking him and biting him and sucking up some of his energy, and it doesn't look too good for Godzilla. But thankfully, the crew of the Gotengo has some ideas. Ozaki funnels some of his own Kaiser power into Godzilla to re-energize him. Godzilla then uses that to blast off one of Kaiser Ghidorah's heads. He then grabs one of the other heads to cut off another with Ghidorah's own beams, and then he uses the third head to toss Ghidorah into a building and then starts tossing him around by the tail. But he saves the best for his finishing move. He tosses Ghidorah into the air and blasts the shit out of him, propelling him into outer space before blowing him up. Godzilla, well, he's still all charged up. He turns around and blasts the Gotengo out of the sky, and it appears that Godzilla might just attack what's left of our human heroes. But he stops when he sees his own son standing in the way. Godzilla decides that, well, you know what, maybe after such a long day of kicking everything's asses, maybe he could just go back to the ocean with his son and just chill for a bit. And that allows for Don Frye to go over to Anna Ananashi to see if he can get laid after a long day of kicking everything's asses. Alright, let's get to the three things that I like about this monster mash that is Godzilla Final Wars. Right out of the gate, I gotta tip my cap to the fact that this movie has very little story to get in the way of the plot. It doesn't need it. Again, this was not a movie designed to do much more than just simply celebrate 50 years of Godzilla. So what's it do? It goes all out with Godzilla fighting monsters. The typical ratio for these movies is usually something like 2/3 human stuff and 1/3 monster stuff. But here, it feels much more like 4/5 monster stuff and only 1/5 human stuff. Yes, there are times in which we are seeing our heroes and having them deal with the alien stuff, but it never goes very long before shifting back to the monster stuff happening. Also, let's be honest, having the mutant people subplot also kind of makes them monsters too. Not literal monsters, I'm not a jerk. I'm just saying that it gives them something more interesting in terms of action scenes because Ozaki is doing the cool kung fu stuff. So yeah, this movie is crazy fast-paced and exciting and full of action. Second, the look of this movie is also seemingly different than what we had seen in the other Millennium movies. While not all of the looks are good necessarily, because there are times in which blue or orange filters are used to almost make the movie look like The Matrix when there's a blue haze over everything, and it's a little bizarre because it looks like it just really wants to be The Matrix. When the orange haze is used, it looks like a wasteland or a war zone. And I understand the idea around using those, but those aren't my favorite looks of the movie. What I like most are the scenes in which the monsters are attacking each other. It looks straight up like, something that's truly been updated from the oldest Godzilla movies from the 60s and 70s. While, yes, most of the movies are generally built to look like they all belong in the same series, there are some really well done outside sets that look like something out of the movies where Godzilla takes on King Kong or Rodan or Ghidorah, especially in the 60s once they went to color. But it's just, it just updated with so much better monster suits and effects for this movie. There is seemingly a care to try to make this movie look like it belongs much more with the Showa era than anything else. And on top of that, the entire sci-fi elements of this movie is right out of those early 70s movies. The Exilians, the set for the Gatango, to a certain extent the Exilian mothership, all of it just feels very classic. While it doesn't entirely look different from the other Heisei or Millennium Era looks, this movie does feel like it has its own look and its own feel that is separated from pretty much anything that the 80s and 90s had created with the Godzilla movies. It's just kind of this nice, warm blanket for longtime Godzilla fans. Thirdly, the sheer number of monster characters you see here should be everything a Godzilla fan should want. You have Godzilla, Ghidorah, you have Mothra, you have Rodan, you have the Praying Mantis, the Spider, the Lobster Dude, the Smog Monster, King Caesar, Manda, Gigan, and Anguirus. These are all classics from fun past entries. And again, these are all characters from the Showa era. Then to give us all that satisfaction of watching the real Godzilla destroy the American version is kind of cathartic. And just for cuteness, we also get a baby Godzilla. There's really nothing more to say about this. Just go back and hear all of the description that I had earlier. This roster is fantastic. It is full of action, and it really feels a little bit more like a remake of Destroy All Monsters, and we'll get to that movie eventually. But what a way for a Godzilla era to end. And in the end, Godzilla would get a long rest after Final Wars. He did make a cameo in the 2007 critical darling Always, Sunset on 3rd Street 2. He appears in a dream sequence in that. And that would seem to indicate that there was still something for Toho to do with the character, and it seemed as though he would be back sooner than later. However, it turned out to be much later. Despite there being rumblings of a new version filmed for IMAX, it wasn't until 2016's Shin Godzilla did the big guy return in a Japanese film. Of course, we had our version in 2014, but 2016's was a mighty triumphant return. It won 7 Japan Academy Prize Awards, including Best Picture, and having 4 more nominations. And yes, the Japan Academy Prize is essentially their Oscars. Yeah, Shin Godzilla won Best Picture at their Oscars. We are going to get to Shin Godzilla sooner than later because while that movie is kind of divisive among some of the corners of the fandom, it is one of my favorites of the series. Now, I don't fault too many people for saying that Godzilla Final Wars is maybe the last of the truly classic Godzilla films. His next film would be the American one in 2014 that brought the big fella back to the worldwide stage, but they aren't made like they were anymore from 1954 to 2004, and that's okay. I say the same thing about the Bond series after The World Is Not Enough. New eras, new ideas, new creative ideas behind the scene, behind series. These things aren't bad things, despite what some people may say. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. Now, when I return next week, I'm going to talk about a truly modern and unique monster tale that is definitely one that cuts deep and kind of crawls inside you, under the skin. So until next week, stay spooky.